My name is Linda Carter. I'm 68 years old, and I live alone in a small town in Ohio. People often say my house looks warm and welcoming. There are flower pots on the front porch, a white rocking chair by the window, and wind chimes that sing whenever the breeze blows. But after the sun goes down, the house feels much bigger than it really is. Every room reminds me of someone who is no longer there. My husband, Robert, passed away 6 years ago after a long illness. Since then, the silence has become my closest companion. I have only one child, my son, Michael. He is 38 years old. He lives in Chicago with his wife, Sarah, and my 7-year-old granddaughter, Emma. Michael has always been the greatest gift of my life. When he was little, he followed me everywhere. He would hold my hand so tightly that I could hardly move my fingers. Every night before bed, he would hug me and whisper, "Love you, Mom." Back then, I believed nothing could ever change that. As he grew older, he became hardworking and kind. After college, he found a good job in Chicago. He got married, bought a beautiful home, and started his own family. I was proud of everything he had achieved. Even after he moved away, he never forgot about me. Every Sunday afternoon, my phone would ring. "Hi, Mom. How are you doing?" Those calls became my favorite part of every week. Sometimes we talked for an hour. Sometimes we laughed until our stomachs hurt. Sometimes little Emma would grab the phone and tell me all about school, her drawings, or the cookies she had baked with her mom. Those moments filled my heart. But life has a quiet way of changing. Michael's job became busier. First, our calls became shorter. Then they became less frequent. Instead of every Sunday, he called every other week, then once a month. Sometimes he only sent a quick text. "Sorry, Mom, busy week, love you." I always answered with the same message. "It's okay, sweetheart. Take care of yourself." I never wanted him to feel guilty. I knew he had responsibilities. He was working hard to give his family a good life. At least that was what I kept telling myself. Still, every Sunday afternoon, I made a fresh cup of tea and placed my phone on the little table beside my favorite chair. Then I waited. Sometimes the phone rang. Sometimes it stayed silent. On those quiet Sundays, I would smile anyway. "He'll call next week," I whispered to myself. One chilly evening in November, I was cleaning an old closet when I found a small blue box. Inside were dozens of photographs. There was one of Michael on his first day of kindergarten. His backpack looked almost bigger than he was. Another showed him at 10 years old, proudly holding the fish we caught together at the lake. Then I found my favorite picture. Michael was 8 years old. We were standing in front of our old house after a heavy snowstorm. His cheeks were bright red from the cold, and he was laughing while holding my hand. I gently touched the picture. "I miss those days," I whispered. Tears filled my eyes before I even realized I was crying. I closed the box and looked around the quiet living room. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. Outside, the wind pushed dry leaves across the porch. I suddenly felt a strange tightness in my chest. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't unbearable. Just different. I sat down in my chair and took a slow breath. "It must be because I'm getting older," I said softly. After resting for a few minutes, I reached for my phone. Without thinking, I tapped Michael's name. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I smiled, expecting to hear his familiar voice. Instead, the call went to voicemail. I hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Hi, sweetheart, it's Mom." I paused and tried to sound cheerful. "I hope I'm not bothering you. I just wanted to hear your voice. I'm feeling a little tired tonight, but don't worry about me. Call me whenever you have time." I almost ended the message. But then I added the words I always wanted him to remember. "I love you, Michael. I always will." I hung up and placed the phone beside me. For a few minutes, I kept looking at the screen, hoping it would light up. It stayed dark. The house became quiet again. I looked at the old photograph still lying on the table. A little boy smiled back at me, holding his mother's hand as if he would never let go. I whispered into the silence, "I miss you, my son." Outside, the November wind grew colder. Inside, I gently held my chest again. This time, the pain was a little stronger, and somehow, deep in my heart, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was different from every other night. When I opened my eyes again, I didn't recognize the room. The ceiling was bright white. The air smelled like medicine. Machines beeped softly beside my bed. For a moment, I wondered if I was dreaming. Then I saw a nurse smiling at me. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," she said gently. "You're awake." My throat felt dry. "What happened?" I asked. She adjusted my blanket before answering. "You had a heart attack last night." I stared at her, unable to speak. A heart attack? It didn't seem possible. The pain had never felt that serious. The nurse must have seen the fear in my eyes. "You're very lucky," she said. "Your neighbor found you early this morning. She noticed your newspapers were still outside and became worried. She called 911 right away." My neighbor, Emma Wilson, she lived across the street. Ever since my husband passed away, she checked on me every few days. Sometimes she brought homemade soup. Sometimes we simply sat on the porch and watched the sunset together. If she hadn't come that morning, I didn't want to think about what might have happened. The doctor visited a little later. He explained that one of my heart's arteries had been blocked. "The good news," he said, "is that we treated it quickly. You'll need plenty of rest and some lifestyle changes, but we expect a full recovery." I nodded quietly. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in my heart since I opened my eyes. "Has my son called?" The doctor looked at the chart before shaking his head. "I'm sorry, we don't have any messages." I forced a small smile. "It's okay." But it wasn't. After he left, I picked up my phone from the bedside table. The battery had been charged by the nurses. There were 3 missed calls, one from my pharmacy, one from an unknown number, one from a telemarketer. No messages from Michael. I told myself not to be disappointed. He didn't know I was in the hospital. How could he? Still, I couldn't stop looking at my phone every few minutes. Every time footsteps came down the hallway, I turned toward the door. Every time someone knocked, my heart beat a little faster. Maybe it was Michael. Maybe he had somehow found out. But each time, It was only another nurse, a doctor, or someone delivering meals. That afternoon, Emma Wilson walked into my room carrying a small vase filled with yellow daisies. "They're from my garden," she said with a warm smile. "They're beautiful." She placed them by the window. "I was so scared, Linda," she admitted. "When you didn't answer your door, I knew something was wrong." I reached for her hand. "You saved my life." She squeezed my fingers. "That's what neighbors do." For the next 3 days, Emma visited every afternoon. She brought crossword puzzles because she knew I loved them. She brought chicken soup that tasted almost as good as my own. Most importantly, she stayed. She listened when I talked. She laughed at my old stories. She made the hospital room feel a little less lonely. But every evening after she left, silence returned. So did my waiting. I watched other patients receive visitors, children carrying balloons, grandchildren bringing handmade cards, husbands holding their wives' hands. I smiled for them. Then I quietly turned my face toward the window so no one would see my tears. On the 4th morning, my phone finally rang. The screen showed one name. Michael. My hands trembled as I answered. "Hi, sweetheart." His voice sounded rushed. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I've been meaning to call you." Hearing his voice made my eyes fill with tears. "I've been really busy at work," he continued. "Everything has been crazy lately." Busy. It was such a simple word, but somehow it felt heavier than the machines beside my bed. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to say, "Michael, I almost died." I wanted to ask, "Why didn't you answer my call?" Instead, I smiled, even though he couldn't see me. "It's okay," I said softly. "I know you've been working hard." He let out a relieved sigh. "Thanks, Mom. I'll try to visit soon, maybe next weekend." I looked around the hospital room. The heart monitor continued its steady beeping. A nurse quietly walked past my door. I opened my mouth. This was my chance. I could tell him where I was. I could tell him how frightened I had been. But the words wouldn't come. I didn't want him to feel guilty. I had spent his whole life protecting him from pain. Even now, I was still trying. "I'm doing fine," I lied. "I'm glad to hear that," he replied. "I have to run into a meeting. I'll call you later, okay?" "Of course." "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, sweetheart." The call lasted less than 2 minutes. When the screen went dark, I held the phone against my chest. For the first time since Robert passed away, I cried without trying to stop myself. Not because Michael had forgotten me. Not because he was too busy. I cried because I suddenly realized something that broke my heart. My little boy still loved me, but somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing how much I needed him. As I wiped away my tears, I noticed the small red light blinking on my phone. A new voicemail notification had appeared. It wasn't from Michael. It was a copy of the message I had left him 4 nights earlier. The message he had never answered. I stared at the screen, unaware that my son was carrying a painful secret of his own, one that would soon change everything I believed about our distance. A week later, the doctor told me I was strong enough to go home. Emma Wilson picked me up from the hospital. She insisted on carrying my small suitcase. "You've done enough," she said with a smile. "Now let someone take care of you for a change." When we arrived at my house, everything looked exactly as I had left it. The rocking chair still sat on the porch. The wind chimes still danced in the breeze. The family picture on the living room table was still waiting for me. But somehow the house felt different. Maybe it was because I had come so close to never seeing it again. Emma helped me put away my medicine before giving me a hug. "You are not alone, Linda," she said. "Promise me you'll call if you need anything." "I promise." After she left, the house became quiet once again. I slowly made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. Old habits are hard to break. Without thinking, I placed my phone beside my cup. Every few minutes, I glanced at the screen. Nothing. 3 more days passed. Then, on Saturday afternoon, a car stopped in front of my house. I looked through the curtains. It was Michael. Before I could open the front door, he was already running up the porch steps. The moment I opened the door, he wrapped his arms around me. He hugged me tighter than he had in years. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered. His voice shook. I hugged him back. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're here now." When he finally stepped inside, I noticed how tired he looked. There were dark circles under his eyes. His beard had grown longer than usual. Even his smile looked exhausted. "You've lost weight," I said. He laughed softly. "I guess I've been skipping too many meals." We sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee between us. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, Michael looked down at his hands. "I know you've been wondering why I haven't called much." I nodded quietly. I never wanted to make excuses. He took a deep breath. 3 months ago, the company I worked for closed our entire department. I stared at him. "You lost your job?" He nodded. "I didn't tell anyone." "Why?" "Because I was ashamed." His eyes filled with tears. "I've always wanted you to be proud of me. After Dad died, I promised myself I'd take care of my family. Then suddenly, I couldn't." He rubbed his forehead. "I spent weeks looking for work. Every interview ended with another rejection." My heart ached as I listened. Eventually, I found 2 temporary jobs. He gave a tired smile. One during the day, one at night. "Michael, some days I worked 16 hours." He looked away. I was always exhausted. I suddenly understood. The missed calls, the short conversations, the long silences. They hadn't happened because he stopped loving me. They happened because he was drowning. "I kept thinking things would get better soon," he continued. "Every time I wanted to call you, I thought, I'll call tomorrow when I have good news." He wiped away a tear. But tomorrow never came. I reached across the table and held his hand. "You never had to face this alone." "I know." He looked at me with deep regret. "But then," his voice cracked, "I finally listened to your voicemail." I froze. "The one you left the night you called me." He pulled out his phone. "I didn't hear it until 4 days later," His thumb pressed the screen. My own voice filled the quiet kitchen. "Hi, sweetheart. It's Mom. I just wanted to hear your voice." Michael quickly paused the recording. I couldn't finish it. Tears rolled down his face. When the hospital called me later that day, I realized I almost lost you. I looked at him in surprise. "The hospital called?" He nodded. "They couldn't reach me at first because my phone was on silent during work. By the time I heard the message," he closed his eyes. I hated myself. He buried his face in his hands. "I wasn't there when you needed me most." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the old kitchen clock. Finally, I stood up and walked around the table. I gently placed my arms around my son. He rested his head against my shoulder, just as he had when he was a frightened little boy. "You know what hurts me the most?" I whispered. He looked up with tear-filled eyes. "You thought you had to carry all this pain by yourself." He sobbed quietly. "I didn't want to disappoint you." I kissed the top of his head. "Oh, Michael! You could never disappoint me. You could lose every job in the world. You could lose your house. You could lose everything you own. But as long as you are my son, you will always have a home." He held me tighter. For the first time in many years, we weren't pretending to be strong. We weren't hiding our fears behind polite smiles. We were simply a mother and her son, sharing the truth that had been buried beneath months of silence. As the afternoon sun faded outside the kitchen window, Michael reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "I wasn't sure if I should show you this," he said quietly. "What is it?" He placed it in my hands. When I opened it and read the first line, my heart skipped a beat. It wasn't another bill. It wasn't another rejection letter. It was something that would change both of our lives forever. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. At the top, I saw the name of a small company in Columbus, Ohio. I looked at Michael. "What is this?" He smiled for the first time that day. "It's a job offer." I looked back at the letter. The company wanted him to start in 2 weeks. Then I noticed something else. The office was less than 40 minutes from my house. I looked up at him. "You'd be living here?" He nodded slowly. "If you'll have me." I couldn't stop the tears from filling my eyes. "But your life is in Chicago." "I know." "Sarah's job?" "We talked about it for weeks." "And Emma?" He smiled. "She can't wait to live closer to Grandma." I stared at him, still trying to believe it. "I turned down a better-paying job in another state." "Why?" He reached across the table and held both of my hands. "Because I learned something the night I almost lost you." He took a deep breath. "I spent years chasing promotions, bigger paychecks, and longer hours. I thought I was building a better future for my family." His voice became softer. "But while I was busy making a living, I almost forgot how to live." Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he said the words I will never forget. "I can always earn more money." "But I can never get another mother." I pulled him into another hug. This time, neither of us tried to hide our tears. 2 months later, Michael and his family moved into a small house just a few miles from mine. It wasn't as big as their home in Chicago. They had fewer rooms, a smaller yard, an older kitchen, but somehow it felt richer because it was filled with time. Every Friday evening, Sarah brought dinner. Sometimes it was homemade lasagna, sometimes fried chicken, sometimes pizza when everyone was too tired to cook. Little Emma ran through my front door without knocking. "Grandma!" Her tiny voice filled every corner of the house. She showed me her homework. We baked chocolate chip cookies together. We planted flowers in the garden. Sometimes we sat on the porch, watching butterflies dance across the yard. My house no longer felt empty. It sounded like laughter again. One afternoon, while Emma was drawing pictures at the kitchen table, she looked up and asked, "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "Why does Daddy call you every day now?" I smiled at Michael, who was washing dishes nearby. He smiled back. "Because I finally learned what's important," he answered. From that day on, my phone rang every evening. Sometimes the calls lasted 30 minutes, sometimes only 2. Sometimes Michael simply said, "Hi, Mom. I was driving home and wanted to hear your voice." Those little calls became the happiest moments of my day. Not because they were long, because they reminded me that love doesn't need hours. Sometimes it only needs a few minutes. One Sunday afternoon, I opened my voicemail. The old message was still there. The message I had left on the night of my heart attack. I listened to it one last time. "Hi, sweetheart, it's Mom. I just wanted to hear your voice. I love you." When it ended, I didn't cry. Instead, I smiled. Then I pressed one button, delete. Michael looked at me. "You erased it?" I nodded. "I don't need it anymore." "Why not?" I slipped my phone into my pocket. "Because now I get to hear your real voice every day." He walked over and kissed my forehead, just like his father used to do. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, sweetheart." As the sun began to set, the whole family gathered on the porch. Emma chased fireflies across the yard. Sarah laughed as Michael tried to catch them with her. The wind chimes played their gentle song. For the first time in many years, the silence was gone. I realized something important. Life doesn't promise us tomorrow. There will always be another meeting, another deadline, another email, another reason to say, "I'll call later." But the people we love cannot always wait. Sometimes one missed phone call becomes a lifetime of regret. If someone you love calls today, answer. If your parents call, take a moment to listen. The conversation may last only a few minutes, but the memory can stay with you forever. My name is Linda Carter. I'm 68 years old. I survived a heart attack. But more importantly, my son and I found each other again before it was too late. And every evening, when my phone begins to ring, I smile before I answer. Because now I know the most important call in life is never the one from work. It's the one from the people who love you. The end.